Hussein Khalid is here with us, and I'm trying to think of the things that you do. Which one do we say today? But we're going to go with the CEO of the Voices of Community Activists and Leaders of Africa, otherwise known as Vocal Africa. And you're here with us this morning. Hussein, good morning.
Good morning. Happy to be here. Looking forward to the discussion as always. And let's do this.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
And before we get into it, because we're going to be looking at illegal detention and torture, whether we're looking at it within national jurisdictions, across borders, across the world, some of the things that we've seen, we'll get into that in just a bit. But as you know, we go around the different countries every week. This week, we're in Ghana. Mark is going to share today's proverb, and we'd like you to interpret that for us and give us your opinion.
Well, DJ Khalid.
He's been wanting to say that for a while.
In the flesh.
So thank you for giving us the opportunity.
So here is another one.
Well done.
From the country of Ghana.
Yes.
The poets of Ghana, the intellectuals of Ghana say, let not what you cannot do tear you away from what you can do. Let not what you cannot do tear you away from what you can do.
Beautiful. I think that's a message that should go to Kenyan citizens down there, because it has been tough. It has been tough. And looking at everything generally, it might seem insurmountable. But step by step, bit by bit, we will deliver this country to the promised land. I think the Gen Z are leading the charge. We have institutions, private institutions that are working to move us forward. So those little steps here and there that are being done are getting us there. So it might appear insurmountable, but bit by bit, we're moving this country forward, and we will get to the promised land, for sure.
That is the most optimistic statement I've heard about Kenya in a while, and I must thank you because you're very correct.
We can't give up on our country. This is the only country we have, and we have no choice but to dig in for the long run and make sure, Mark, that what comes in the next few years is nothing but progress.
Indeed.
And it's in our hands.
Right.
It's in our hands.
It is in our hands. And some of the things that we make public, or some of the things that we make part of discourse, are uncomfortable conversations to have.
Yes.
But be that as it may, uncomfortable as they may be, they are necessary in order to get us to that place that you're talking about, Hussein. We're looking at illegal detention and torture. I'm a student of international relations, and one of the components of that was international humanitarian law.
Yes.
And one of the elements under that component was torture. And torture as one of the things that was signed in the Geneva Conventions and the protocols of international humanitarian law is that it is prohibited, not just within national jurisdictions, not just across regional bodies, but in the globe. Because the world came together into Geneva and they said, you know what, this is what we have seen. And this was after several conflicts. This is what we have seen, that torture takes place, and we have to be able to say no to it, and it is criminal in nature, and the person or persons who inflict this have to then be individually or collectively liable. Very clear.
Very true.
About what the protocols say. Now, those who took those conventions and domesticated them, in other words, ratified them for national jurisdictions and ratified them on a global scale. That means we frown upon it, right? Now, in what situation then do we say an individual has been tortured or allegedly tortured and we don't then do something about it?
Brilliant discussion. And let me just say that torture is prohibited, as you've correctly put it, under local, regional, and international law for us as Kenyans. And in the convention, again, the International Convention Against Torture, which of course has been ratified, the definition is very clear. And if I may read it out, any act by which severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted on a person for such purposes as obtaining from them or a third person information or a confession, punishing them for an act they or a third person has committed or is suspected of having committed, or intimidating or coercing them when such pain or suffering is inflicted by or at the instigation of or with the consent or acquiescence of a public official. So it's mental, it's physical, it has to be, it's done for purposes of obtaining a confession or information, and it's not necessarily just directly to an individual, because you may be torturing someone so that you get information from a third party. You know, so you have these cases sometimes where you hear police have arrested the wife because they are looking for the husband.
Yes.
You know, so third parties are involved. And then what is very important for us to also understand is that it has to be at the instigation or approval or the acquiescence of a public official. So me, you know, we cannot torture.
Yes.
Torture is only done
By the state.
through a public official. It may be the state, it may be someone sent by the state, but there is that element of a public official's involvement.
Okay, so if I do it to Mark,
That's an assault.
it's not torture.
Yeah, you've assaulted him.
Okay, I see.
By law,
That's not nice.
No, it's an example. If you decide to now,
Not even saying nice when you're talking.
correct. Yeah, the definition of torture, there has to be state's involvement.
okay.
Even if the state itself is not involved, but then they send Mark to you to torture you. So he's doing it as a private citizen, but on the direction or through being
proxy.
coerced or being forced to do it, then it's torture.
You see, when you talk about torture and detention in this country, it's something that has been happening for a very long time.
Yep.
And Kenya have been accustomed to think that it is something that is normal. You hear someone has been disappeared, that's another case, you know. Someone has been tortured. That's why you hear some comments when the likes of Boniface Mwangi are tortured outside the country, and members of parliament, including the Foreign Affairs Cabinet Secretary, would say, you know, they took bad manners out of the country, they deserved it, you know. But just what exactly are we communicating to the public with regard to torture to their own citizens, whether it is internally or externally?
It's extremely disappointing, and some of the remarks by our leaders, but also Tanzanian leaders, if you look at what transpired, because up to this point in time, the deportation, the torture, and, you know, everything else, we have not been told what exactly we did wrong. We were deported back to, we never even got into the country. We were stopped at the airport. There has to be a reason why you are deporting someone from your country. You held these two individuals for a number of days, I believe 4 days, tortured them, you know, like seriously tortured them, you know, and then you just drop them next to their borders. And up to this point in time, you have not communicated what they did wrong. You know, it's really despicable, if, you know, to say the least.
Is it okay?
And to have our government, the cabinet secretary, you know, justifying and calling it bad manners. Can you tell us what was bad manners? Because you arrive at the airport, you go through immigration, you get your passport stamped, you're allowed inside the country, you have not done any meeting, you've not even gone for lunch somewhere, you went straight to the hotel. You were at the hotel. You were arrested at the hotel. You know, you are taken by the Tanzanian authorities while you are inside the hotel. So you didn't even get to the courtroom. And then you are taken to the dungeons and tortured. So we want to understand, when Musalia Mudavadi says you took your bad manners, some of us never even got inside the country. We were stopped at the airport and brought back. Martha Karua, Willie Mutunga, myself, Hanifa, and others. So can you explain to Kenyans, because I see now he's in Morocco or something like that, and he's repeating the same sentiments. And to the international community, your own cabinet secretary telling you, keep your bad manners in your country. How are you? What are you communicating about your own nation? It's really disgusting, to say the least, that you would have a cabinet secretary
for
who's
Ministry
an
of Foreign
agent,
Affairs.
for foreign affairs, an agent of doom, also to speak to their nationals who are out there. And this is something I think we really need to interrogate.
If there was an explainer, Hussein, we seem to think that, it's like the rat. The rat chews on the toe and then blows so that you don't feel that initial pinch.
Chews and blows.
Then it chews a little bit more, bites and blows, so that by the time it's knocked off like 3 of your toes and you're not aware. Are we saying that if there was an explainer given for the torture, that it would make the situation better?
Nope, absolutely not. But, at least because you would understand there's something was done wrong. So at this point in time, the first thing we want to know, we were deported. Why? We have the East African Cooperation Agreement. And the East African Cooperation Agreement, the main objective is to ease movement of persons and goods within the borders. If you look at, I believe it's Article 5 of the East African Cooperation, it speaks about integration on political, social, economic matters, and further to address matters legal and judicial. That's not me saying it. It's the East African Cooperation, which clarifies the objective of the cooperation. It's in Article 5. Observing court proceedings is an international process. Yeah, you remember when Uhuru and Ruto were at The Hague. These members of parliament would fly there in hundreds, if I'm not wrong. They're going there to observe the elections. They're going to stand in solidarity. They're going to do it across the world. People do that. I've been to Uganda myself to follow up on cases. You're in court and you're checking on how the process is ongoing. We have what's this case in Kisumu, in Nakuru, the KWS case.
Yes, with Brian
People
Odhiambo.
flock the courtroom, Brian Odhiambo's case, and it's a normal practice across the world. People travel everywhere to attend court cases in solidarity, to follow through and all that. What is wrong with us crossing the border to go sit there and just listen? And then your own cabinet secretary says, umepeleka tabia mbaya huko. Tabia gani hiyo mbaya? Can you clarify ni tabia gani mbaya?
The question the allegation that is leveled is that you have been sponsored by foreign agencies and foreign powers to the millions of dollars, according to some Tanzanian MP, and to destabilize their nation.
Okay. What interest do we have? What will we get by destabilizing Tanzania? What do you get by destabilizing any country for that matter? Absolutely nothing. And, a good number of people who traveled on that day used their own resources, including myself. People use their own money for solidarity, because colleagues across the border, when they say, look, we are having this case, it's an election year, people even observe elections all over the world. This is part of that electioneering process. Tunakaribisha wazungu wanakuja kuobserve elections, and we have no problem with that. Yeah, when they come, because you're saying we've been given money, but when they come themselves, you're not saying anything. Yeah, so we said, okay, in solidarity, we are East African Cooperation, we will come, and it is a fallacy. And this is what governments play on every time there's an issue, because they think that is an agenda that would sell to the public. It's a defense mechanism. But, there is no institution in any country that receives more funding, particularly in Africa, from foreign donors than the government itself.
That's true.
That's anywhere in the world, in this Africa. You tell me, how much money has Kenya received from China? Compare that to civil society. How much money has Kenya received from the US? So who is actually being influenced? And this is the problem with this older generation. They just don't get it.
Khalid, You see, we talk about matters about torture as in this country, but let's look at the Kitengela 4 happened. Went silent. You know, we talk about matters to do with Brian Odhiambo in Naivasha. It's the case that is there. We talk about Koimbori, who was arrested, was picked up, tortured, and thrown out. Then you hear what the police who are mandated to investigate these matters, and the statement out saying that all these was stage managed. That this man inflicted pain on himself, ingested chemicals on himself to a point that he's not able to speak, and threw himself in a thicket in a coffee plantation somewhere. And you look at the justice system, and one would argue, and even reports suggest, that the justice system has been weaponized against its own citizens. Is that the case from where it is you said?
I totally agree with you. You know, it's weaponization of security, and the security instruments, apparatus being used against the masses. You have a system where the security agencies are not independent. They look at what the political leadership is, the direction they are moving, and then they decide that is the direction we will also take. And this is the unfortunate bit, particularly in African societies, and Kenya being one of them. Our security agencies are absolutely not independent. They owe their allegiance not to the oaths that they took. They owe their allegiance not to the constitution and the laws of the land, but to whoever is heading the government, whoever is in charge or leading the executive. And as long as we have that as the system within which our security agencies operate, then it's going to be extremely difficult for us to have a democratic, security service in Kenya. We will, clutch on straws and we will do all sorts of things, but we must have an independent security agency. And in Kenya presently, as it stands today, it is absolutely not independent. That's why statements such as this, look at Brian Odhiambo. Brian Odhiambo was picked in broad daylight. Everyone saw what was happening. There are tens of witnesses, and it took months before anyone could do anything. And this is the problem we have in this country. And when we speak, as Mark has said, you are foreign agencies. You are being funded to destabilize. We don't care. People can say what they want to say, but we believe we stand on the right side of history. And as long as your conscience is clear on that, you're good to go.
You said something that actually caused a shiver down my spine. And why I have a shiver down my spine is you said that our agencies are following the political winds and then following whoever is head of the executive. That is a very, how do I put it, potent statement. Because then you're saying the buck doesn't stop even with the police. The buck stops with the highest office in the land. Now, of course, we know how the law works, and that's why even the Hague case you mentioned happened, because of ultimate responsibility. Now, let's look at Kenya and the situation that is going on. The abductions that have happened, we've seen courts, for example, confirm that so and so is responsible, correct?
Yes.
When that happens, what is the next logical step?
The court has said that the IG of police has a case to answer when it came to certain issues.
Exactly.
Yes.
So when that statement is made by the courts, right? And then the people to execute this statement by the courts are the same people, because the courts do not have the court clerk cannot come to the executive and execute those orders. What does that mean? What happens?
Yeah, so that's lacuna in law, and we need to deeply interrogate that. We've said this so many times. The police cannot investigate themselves.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that's the situation we have presently. We have various laws, the Coroner's Act and others that we're trying to push that can then come into place that will then detach. I think you remember in Moi's era, prosecutors were police officers. You know, so they would take those matters to court and they would decide how. But we've made steps. We've moved from there and we are now, you know, at a different place. But we need to continue with those reforms. If you remember the case of Masengeli, who was the acting Inspector General.
Yes.
And I think it's 6 or 7 times he was summoned.
Yeah, 7 was a lucky number because 7 is the one he showed up for.
Yeah, exactly. So you have the chief of, the police service.
Yeah.
And then you issue a warrant of arrest against him.
Yes.
So who is supposed to arrest him?
The chief.
And he's at the helm, he's at the peak. And so who do you send to arrest him? So these are issues I think Kenyans have to interrogate. And we're saying, there are institutions such as IPOA and others that are deliberately, underfunded so that they don't exercise. Today, IPOA and Kenya National Commission on Human Rights and others simply receive administrative budgets so that they exist, so that you and I know they are there. And the president and others can say, we have institutions that work, but in actual sense, they only have salaries and rent. They can't go out to follow up on these cases because they don't have the programming budget for it. And that they're deliberately, underfunded so that they don't do their work out there, but they need to be there.
So you kind of keep them, you just kind of keep them surviving.
Exactly.
They can pay a salary here or there.
They can pay their rent.
Talk.
They can pay electricity.
Yeah. They can say something every now and then.
That's what
but in terms of meaningful, impactful implementation of what is supposed to happen,
no budget.
Zero.
So they will tell you, so do you have the information? Can you share? Because they can't go down to the ground to undertake the autopsy. We were in this young boy, the Form 3 student who was shot at the back of the head by the Kenya Forest Service. I think it was in Narok. I'm not quite sure. And we called the IPOA officers and said, we know this does not fall within your docket, but are you able to come? They said, we can't even get to Eldoret, let alone to where you are, because you don't have a budget for it.
What are you talking about?
They couldn't come to the ground. They don't have money to actually go down to visit.
No, okay,
they don't have that.
Come on, Hussein. When you say they don't have,
yes.
What would be is that what we're talking about, a transportation issue?
Transportation, they don't have personnel.
Okay.
Because that's a region outside, where their offices are.
Okay.
So for them, you need to have someone on the ground. Like we had to travel from Nairobi.
Yes.
To go to, I'm trying to recall, it's not beyond Eldoret. I'm trying to remember where it was. It was in April. Yeah. And they couldn't get there, because they said we don't have the resources to help us get there. So these are things that are happening within the country. The Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, they have witnesses that they want to book for a case, but they don't have money to bond the witnesses so that they can attend, because the witness says, okay, I'm ready, but you need to facilitate me. You need to facilitate me to go and give my testimony. And these are supposed to be funds that are available. The government, you have money. They're doing breakfast meeting right now. And I don't know, prayers and stuff like that. When, the crux of the matter, the issues that are down there, the money is spent on other luxuries. So we have to question why this is happening. And I think we also discussed the Auditor General's report yesterday.
Indeed. I want us to take a break, Mark. Can you hold on to that potato? And Hussein Khalid is here with us this morning, and we're saying, okay, you know what? Illegal detentions, torture, it is rampant. Of course. That we've seen some of the highest numbers in the 2 years where we were told that it was going to reduce or be extinguished completely. So we're asking questions around why is it still going on to the extent that it's happening. So much so that we see it allegedly happening beyond the borders of the country. So what's behind all of this? And Mark has that hot question.
My question is this. It seems like a very pretty simple question, but it's loaded. When these abductions, these killings happen, how do the perpetrators benefit? Because I'm struggling to see what benefit there is to whoever did it, to Koimburi, for example, what they got out of it.
Yeah, so I think different abductions, different cases of torture have different expectations from them. If you look at the Koimburi case, I believe it was a message that was being sent to a political divide within the nation.
Even bigger than him.
Even bigger than him. That, we will not let you guys run amok in this country. And, if you so dare us, then this is what will happen to you. So these are threats, more or less, sent to one equation of the political sector within the country. If you look at, torture, for instance, meted out on activists, you again want to force them to toe your line. Like, this is what the government wants, and you must abide by this. And if you so try to do anything otherwise, then this is what will happen to you. If you look at the abductions, Kitengela 4 and others, it's sending a message to probably social media adherents, people who are active online, telling them that, if you continue with your ways of doing things, we will not allow you, to just do things as you want. So I think,
but does it work?
It depends.
That's my question.
That's my point. That's my point.
My question is, all these things happening, you're threatening people not to speak. They're speaking more.
Exactly.
Threatening people not to use social media. They're using. So
exactly.
That's what I'm asking. Who's benefiting?
This is what.
It seems more like an opposition thing to me than a government thing, because opposition seems to be gaining more support by the day.
Exactly. Yeah. If you recall, I said the older generation does not get it because this is how they are used to doing things. They're coming from the Moi era, where you threaten people and people keep quiet. This is where Tanzania is.
Yeah.
But the generation that we have today, people have moved on. They just don't get it. They think, for instance, how do thousands and thousands of people go to the streets to march? They don't get it. Because they're used to, you must pay these people. Yeah. So someone somewhere is paying them. So you go on abducting people, because those people who are abducted during the Gen Z protest time, almost 99% were being asked, where are you getting the money from? Yeah. So they are busy trying to find where the money is coming from, but people are using their own money.
And they're not listening to the issue.
Exactly. And this generation, it's about the issues. They don't get threatened by these, gimmicks. Yeah. Your generation used to fear such kinds of stuff. But this generation does not. Actually, the more you threaten them, the more they even speak louder and louder and louder.
The more they become hardened in their positions.
And this is what I'm saying. They just don't get it. They think that, you can go around and selling fear and stuff like that. But this is not that generation. The times have changed. That's why I say 2024 protests have changed this country for good. And we are not going back there. No matter how much torture you inflict on the population, no matter how many people you kill, we cannot go back. We have crossed that line. And from now onwards, if you want to walk with the people, you have to address their issues.
Yeah.
Is it necessary to give evidence? When we talk about some of these things, we can take the latest case, for example, where we are told that the Juja member of parliament is unable to speak. There are certain elements of torture that were then instilled on him. Boniface Mwangi coming out of Tanga and then saying that he was tortured, giving evidence of the bodily harm, or even showing something that it was somebody else who inflicted. The young activist Agatha from Uganda, also talking about essentially her being raped with an object. Is it necessary to give evidence to cement or establish an allegation, or can my personal rendition of the happenings suffice? In a case that is sensitive, in cases that are so sensitive, Khalid, is it necessary to give evidence?
In a court of law, of course, your personal testimony carries a lot of weight. You know, when you detail what happened, and you know, one cannot deny, for example, in the case of Boniface Mwangi and Agatha, you cannot deny that these individuals were in the hands of the Tanzanian government. They confirmed that much.
Yes.
You know, they said, yes, we have them. We were in their country. Everyone saw it. Was all over social media when they went to arrest him. So you can't run away from that fact. And even when in custody, if someone inflicts pain, even on themselves, you as the person who is in charge of that person are responsible. So sometimes you hear of these cases where individuals are said to have committed suicide while in police cells. That is still the responsibility of the police. I don't know, colleagues, if you've been told when you go to, when you are arrested, we are told to remove your belt.
Yes.
You're told to remove your shoelaces. Because those are tools that can can be used in there to cause harm to yourself or to another person. So the police have responsibility of your safety. So in this case, the Boniface Mwangi, the Tanzanian government cannot run away from it because they had him, you know. And in a court of law, you have to, of course, present that information.
Yes.
And from like some of the threats, what they tell us, some of the threats they've been issued with is they were recording some of the atrocities that are being committed. And they were threatening to release those. In fact, we are waiting for those because that will be very even more clear evidence of what's happened in Tanzania.
And a follow-up to that then would be that if we look at the region, save for one country, two countries in this region, everybody else are parties to the Geneva Conventions and the IHL protocols, especially in conflict and non-conflict situations. They are. They've ratified them and they have, in most cases, domiciled them. Right? If we look at where torture has been used famously around the world, whether we're looking in this part of the world or if we're looking at what happened in Eastern Europe, if we're looking at what happened in Asia in times of the Vietnam War, if we're Guantanamo Bay on the other side of the globe, so many cases, and that people were asked to come and give their personal testimony of what happened and what happened as a result of the torture that was meted upon these individuals. We saw that as a result of that, people are in jail today. There are people who fought wars in the 60s who are in jail today. There are people who did things, abhorrent things to other human beings during the Yugoslav war, whose cases are still being heard before the ICC, but also then who are guests of the ICC in terms of incarceration. Leading to this question that if we are all parties to protocol, and we see things like this happening, these are the ones that are reported. How far can nations, states actually go to ensure that these things that you are party to, that you have agreed will not happen and that we see happening, will stop?
I think that's a very good question. And one thing we have to communicate, particularly to those torturers and those autocratic regimes, is that there is no statute of limitation in law. That means 60 years, 100 years from now, if there is evidence, you will be prosecuted. And that is what we are doing mainly right now. As Vocal Africa, we are collecting and documenting the evidence. It may not be possible under the current regime because they are the one who sent those officers to do what they did. But trust me, a time will come. You know, Pinochet, famously referred to as an example in this case, committed whatever atrocities he committed 40, 50 years back. I think he was 90 when he was being prosecuted. So it will catch up with you. Whatever is happening, whatever has happened in Tanzania, it will catch up with them. Whatever is happening in Kenya presently, the Gen Z killings, it will catch up with whoever is responsible for that. What we need to do is to make sure that we have the evidence. We are collecting it. We have the post-mortem reports. We have the statements from the witnesses. We have, everything that is required you keep it safely, because a time will come when they will have to answer to those mistakes that they're committing presently.
You see, you said,
burning question again.
Yeah.
The fact that we're talking about disciplined forces doing these things. Now, I'm thinking to myself, what empowerment can we give the individual officer, the individual police person, forest guard, whatever you want to call them? What power do we need to give them that they're able to say to their superiors on certain matters, no?
I think the Constitution has attempted to do that, because the Constitution of Kenya is very clear that you are held liable or accountable as an individual.
Yes.
The Constitution says you cannot hide behind orders from above.
Yes.
If you are issued with an illegal order, go and kill, you are supposed to say no.
Yep.
And if you do it, you can't go to court. It is not a defense that I was ordered to torture, that I was ordered to kill.
Yeah.
But that's in Kenya. You know, that is empowerment if only the officers can understand it.
Yeah.
You know, because that means then you are personally liable.
Yes.
Make decisions on your own. Yes, receive the orders, but if those orders are going against your oath, then you're not supposed to execute them.
You see, when you're having that conversation, you look at the Constitution and the independence of the police institution, that they should not get orders from any other office because they are autonomous, they're independent,
Should
they run
be.
their affairs. So if they choose not to live as the according to the ethos of the Constitution, that is up to them. But then again, we would tie that question with the presence of political goodwill to ensure that the Constitution is respected, that human rights are respected. Because remember, during the 2022 campaigns, what was the clarion call? Because it was coming at the premise of the Yala River bodies that were being found and whatnot. And the promise that was given to Kenyans is once we form government, all these abductions and killings will end. But we are in this government. But what you're seeing is more numbers
Every year.
every day, more numbers coming up, which begs the question: the political goodwill is lacking in dealing with this matter.
I totally agree with you. And you know, in anything that you do, kitu chochote, leadership is very important. You know, if you look at an institution, whether private or public or what, whoever is at the helm matters a lot in how things are done. Whether it's an organization where if the person in charge is corrupt, if the person in charge is a thief, if the person in charge does not care about the goodwill of the, you know, workers who are there, the same will apply across board. And it's the same even in a country. So political leadership, those who are at the helm, if today you can come up and say, we will deal with those who are putting us in coffins, you know, you have to abide by the law. You can't just come up and say, now if people can be orderly, we will end abductions. Because that's a message you're sending to people out there.
Right.
You know, so the leadership, if of any, even in your home, nyumbani kwako mwenyewe, if the head of the house, you know, does not have those values that you aspire to be, that household is already lost. So leadership is key. If you want to see a successful institution, look at the person at the helm. If that person is straightforward, if that person is, you know, clear in their mind, they're focused, they know what they want to achieve. And that's the problem that we have in this country. How
you
can you
think-
have a CS, surely? But instead of selling magical Kenya, you are selling bad manners.
Do you think that it's still accepted, or that we still see it? The reason, I mean, I'm trying to imagine if we have seen that something doesn't work, it's been established, it doesn't work because it's counterintuitive to say that you're going to torture one person because everybody, and because we don't want them to be on social, because everybody gets on social media, people are still speaking about it. Not like the way it used to happen before. You could shut people up and they would come back from a torture chamber or whatever, and they would never speak another word again. We've seen
Absolutely,
that.
yes.
It has happened.
It has
but
happened.
in this day and age, it doesn't happen that way. That if you torture somebody, or you abduct somebody, like we've seen, or they've disappeared, you've disappeared them for whatever, people are speaking out. if that is the case, could it be that it's imagined that it is still employed as a form because there is still the thinking that it does work? That's why we still see it happening. If it wasn't believed, perhaps we would not see so much reoccurrence.
Yep, there is that thinking. Without a doubt, there is that thinking. But like I said, it's in a generation that is, they grew up believing that it works. And for them now to understand that it doesn't work. Look at the case of Agatha. I think she was speaking, I don't know, in one of the media channels. They said they will release the videos and they will embarrass me. But she said, I'm not the one to be embarrassed.
It is you.
I didn't do this to myself. You are the people who did it. So I want you actually to release those videos because it is you who are the perpetrators. Why should I be ashamed when I was a victim? So that thinking for these torturers and they just don't get it, that the ground has shifted, that the population across the world, we're in a global village now. Whatever is happening in Palestine is seen live in Kenya. Whatever is happening in Kenya, it's live in South Africa, and the same, all over the world. And people are no longer like caged in, like you can no longer speak out your mind and say what you want to say. And we're not in that era anymore.
I still go back to my question about the ability of our police services, our security services, to be able to be actually independent. Because that becomes a key and critical issue.
Very true.
Because I don't think there's a solution to this until we get to such a point where the security agencies are actually able to do what they're mandated to do by the Constitution and separate themselves from the politics of the day. Now, I go back to my question. In Kenya here, what is needed? Because the police have been given their budget, correct? And they are financially independent to make their own decisions.
Supposed to be.
Yes. But the financial independence does not seem to affect the independence from the political class. Now I'm talking about now on a policy level. What do we need to do to the Constitution, to the laws, to actually effect this thing? Because I'll tell you, if you tomorrow are in a place of power and the option to use security agencies is available to you, you will tell me you won't use them.
I hope I won't, but I get I get the temptation. But you see, yes, financial institution in itself, in and by itself, is not the only way to ensure independence. As long as the appointment of the Inspector General has the Cabinet Secretary involved, has the President involved as the appointing authority, has a Parliament involved, a Parliament that owes its allegiance to one individual. As long as all these institutions that are subject to an individual's authority are involved, then that independence will not be there. What we need to have, for instance, is a police service commission made up of police officers themselves, the senior most officers, that then sit independently and decide who will be the next Inspector General. There is no involvement of the executive, no involvement of. So then they know that if they mess up, they're answerable to others other than the executive and stuff like that. That's one way of ensuring. And then number two, police officers must be accountable to the people. They must report to the people, not to some security committee in Parliament somewhere, where if you don't tell them that I abducted Koimburi and did this and this, they'll be angry with you. That's what they want to hear. And that, you have to stand up and say, he abducted himself. And then they say, good job. You did a good job. These are the things that we have to address if we truly want that independence of the security agencies.
Interesting.
Khalid. The question would be, with all these cases that we have here and police abductions and what is happening, one would assume that you've said that you've gathered the evidence that you have in your position. Are you looking to get justice through the courts?
Well, through various institutions. Presently, we don't have so much faith in the Kenyan judiciary, but we are trying to push through certain cases that we feel we can get justice from with the Kenyan courts. Much of this documentation, we are also trying to address the East African Court of Justice, the African Court on Human Rights, and of course the international community. The case of Agatha and Boniface Mwangi, we submitted an urgent appeal to the United Nations Working Group on Enforced and Involuntary Disappearances. So they're looking into it. So there are different avenues to take up, depending on the case. For instance, like the Brian Odhiambo's case, we've gone through the courts.
Yeah.
We have our doubts, but we are moving somewhere. We want that action taken. So it really depends on the case, and it's on a case-by-case basis to determine which particular channel to follow.
Okay. As we speak and sit in this room, there's a national prayer breakfast that is taking place. And one would assume that whatever religion you ascribe to, that the divine or supreme is listening to the prayer, and that once you have it in this manner, that there's a reset that essentially needs to be done, and that there's help that's being sought from the heavens to manifest and fix things here on earth. One would assume that this is one of the things that we are talking about today, which needs a fixing. That there's mistrust, there's distrust, there's value that has been lost. There are people who have suffered, there are people who have died at the hands of folks who are actually responsible for securing and ensuring their safety. What should we be praying for?
I think for me, we should be praying for leadership that is people-driven, leadership that is not antagonistic, particularly with its population. We should pray for a leadership that responds to concerns of their people, because at this point in time, it is lacking. The leadership that we have is self-serving. A leadership that, is looking for every other opportunity to enrich itself. We have a leadership that does not think of the mamamboga on the ground. They're looking for every opportunity to say it is our time to eat, And as I said, if the leadership I'm talking about is general, it's the president, it's the deputy president, it's the cabinet secretary, it's those people in parliament. If that leadership does not conform to the people's wishes and desires, then as a country, we will have lost it. We believe in divine intervention. I think Kenya is a religious society. Whichever faith you belong to, prayers are key. The first words of our national anthem are a prayer, E Mungu nguvu yetu. So we acknowledge that God is our power, and He is the one who directs things. So, prayers are welcomed. But if those prayers are not seconded by action that we related to what we've prayed for,
right,
then it's useless. It won't bear anything.
I almost want to ask, just because you've given a very spiritual answer, why is the guest speaker always American?
Is the guest speaker American at this prayer breakfast?
There he is. Does he look local to you?
Oh, okay.
I don't know that you'll be able to answer that question, Khalid.
That I don't know.
Yeah.
He's been brought to stabilize our prayers. Yes.
Okay, interesting. I mean, that's a question we need to ask them, of course.
This would be the second conversation that we've had this morning that perhaps we are not able to come to a close on because of how deep these matters run, and essentially what needs to be done when it comes to sorting out these issues. You will always have, issues that pop up here.
Spice up your life.
It shouldn't be.
Our hope is that we get to the place whereby we have value again, and that we operate in that space where value is number one. Hussein Khalid is the CEO of Vocal Africa. He's been here with us this morning and having conversations around what should be as opposed to what is. We continue and keep these conversations front and center. They work. Let's keep having them. Thank you for being in the hot seat of Situation Room this morning. And thank you everybody for being part of our
Spice.